Good day. This is Guest Interview, and I'm Barbara DeLand. It's that time of the year when we start remembering or planning important dates for the following year. And someone who has been gathering information to help us do that is Robert Doyle, our guest today, who has compiled the Newfoundland and Labrador Almanac for 2019. Thank you for coming, Robert.
Well, thank you, Barbara. It's nice to be chatting with you.
I'm sitting here looking at this nice, bright red almanac. It's a very attractive looking book.
Yes, well, it's Doyle's 2019 Almanac of Newfoundland and Labrador, and we've changed the
Okay,
color.
excuse me, would you repeat that? The correct name of it is?
Sure, Doyle's 2019 Almanac of Newfoundland and Labrador.
Thank you.
Yes.
And for those who are unfamiliar with the art of compiling an almanac, would you tell us a little bit about how you do that? For example, do you do it by yourself, or is it a team effort, or approximately how many hours does it take you, and some of your major sources of information?
Sure. Well,
Whatever you want to share.
Yeah, well, it's a team effort. I'm the editor, compiling a lot of our Newfoundland and Labrador interest stories. Our science editor, Dr. Gus Fanning, he has a PhD in ocean and earth sciences. He's the one who takes all the forecasting. He goes through all what happened in history. He looks at all the weather stations throughout Newfoundland and Labrador. He looks at historical records. He looks at whether it's an El Nino or El Nina year in the Pacific, and that influences what happens in Newfoundland
Really?
in the following year. So he takes all this into consideration.
So what happens in that area one year affects us the following year?
Yes, it does. What happens in the fall?
That's interesting.
It is, yes.
Huh.
And certainly with global warming, so certainly challenging times. So he takes all the information from various stations, compiles them, and he does some local, it's all local forecasting that he does for long-term forecasting, and it's for each month in 2019.
Well, I don't know whether it's just that we get more news about all of this now, and that there are so many more sources of information of news, but it seems like the weather around the world has been very, very bizarre in many ways in 2018.
It has.
Very extreme.
Yes, even here in Newfoundland, we had, if you remember how the months of March and June in this year, 2018, were quite drastic. It was very cold in June, and March was also off. So it was, of course, in Newfoundland, we all love to talk about the weather. So you're right.
And then in July, it turned hot and humid.
It did, and then we had probably one of the hottest Julys in August, middle of July to the end of August in recent times. So
and during that time, I'm not fond of hot and humid, but I kept thinking, well, at least we're not having forest fires, and
Right.
we're not having tsunamis, and we're not having tornadoes and so on. So it seems that these things were happening in many parts of the world.
it is, and I think the global warming definitely has an effect on what's
Yes,
happening,
yes.
the wild weather, as you mentioned.
So if the last part of 2018, and now we're talking in November, toward the end of the year, if that is the effects of that in Asia are
Yes.
affecting us next year, what does that mean? Because they have had earthquakes and hot
Yes.
weather and all.
Yeah, well, what we're predicting is that it'll be what they call a moderate to high El Nino effect, which is happening in the Pacific Ocean now.
Which means what?
Sometimes it's to do with the temperature of the water.
Yeah, but what does El
specifically.
Nino represent?
Yeah, well, that's it. It's a weather term. There's two. There's El Nino, which is kind of a major impact on weather, and also El Nina, which is
Yes.
a smaller impact.
Niño,
And-
Niña.
Yeah, and it has to do with the temperature of the water, especially in the Pacific, and what's happening there. And so we're suggesting that from our predictions that 2019 is going to be a moderate El Nino. So
But what does El Nino represent in terms of the weather? Is it hotter, colder, drier, wetter, what?
yes, well, what we're saying is for Newfoundland, in Labrador for next year, that we're looking at is going to be slightly warmer.
Oh.
But coming along with that will give us some increased precipitation, both in rain and snow.
Really?
Yes. So it'll be milder temperatures, but more rain and snow throughout the
Mm-hmm.
throughout the winter and the spring.
I wonder how much ice we'll have.
Yes, well, that's true. We actually, in one of our sections, we have we talk about the prediction for icebergs, for the around the coastlines for next year as
I
well.
was thinking more about walking and driving ice
Oh,
kind
yeah.
of thing. Well, if it's
Shipping.
moderate, then it seems to me that generally our temperature in much of the year sort of hovers around freezing, especially in the
Yes.
winter months.
Yes.
And does that sound like it's maybe typical coming up?
Typical, a little bit warmer, but again,
Mm-hmm.
that would bring the increased precipitation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay, probably more in the line of rain more than
Yes.
snow
Well,
if it's warmer.
yes. Well,
Mhm.
yes.
Okay. Robert, what interested you to begin this yearly project in the first place?
Well, about 4 years ago, in our pharmacy, neighborhood pharmacy downtown, we've recently renamed. It was Theatre Pharmacy. So we've had museum showcases in the pharmacy for 25 years. And one of our patients who was in waiting for a prescription is my friend I mentioned earlier, Gus Fanning, and where he has his PhD in ocean and earth sciences. And he said, Barbie, I could do some pretty detailed local long-term forecasting. And because he was looking at in our showcase, we had a copy of Dr. Chase's Almanac from the 1900s that was based in out of New York. And so I said, okay, well, yes, I could. I've always wanted to do some writing myself. So we said, okay, well, he would do the forecasting, and I would do some local interest stories about the province. I guess I was influenced by my grandfather, Gerald S. Doyle. He traveled throughout the province by boat in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. He had trained as a pharmacist in the early 1900s. He went on to go around the province selling his medications and medicines. At the same time, he was collecting folk songs and stories and poetry all along the coast. He collected over 100 of them and published them in songbooks. And so that gave me a little bit of
So
inspiration.
he was really interested in not only doing what he was doing as far as work was concerned, he was also interested in taking note of the culture.
He was because he noticed when he go into a small community, they were all isolated communities along the coast and the outports we would call them, and he'd noticed that there'd be certain cultures and songs and traditions in that community or outport that he wouldn't see in the next community or outport. So he was trying to record these. He'd have a lot of times the local singers or they weren't singers, they were the fishermen and the loggers would come to him, and he would record their songs and publish them.
And that's become a very important
It has.
bit of information for many, many people.
Yeah, a lot of times the information in songs is probably more informative than formal government records. Yes.
That's
historically.
very true a lot of places in the world, isn't it?
Yes.
And so it was your patient who came in for a pharmaceutical connection,
Yes.
saw the old copy that was
Yes.
in one of your cases.
Yes.
And that triggered the conversation about
Yes.
one for here.
Yes.
That's very interesting.
so-
Yeah. So you've been doing that now this is the
This-
fourth
this,
year.
This is our fourth year. Yes.
Okay. Now, what parts of the compiling do you find most interesting?
For me, on my end of it, like I try and do all the local stories. I try and focus on stories of interest to showcase and celebrate our province, our people, and our heritage, and always cognizant of the influence that the land and the sea, the effect that and the influence it has on our peoples. So, for me, trying to look at different stories, and I'm always trying to keep this in mind, doing the research, and so I find this quite interesting. For example, we've done some different stories this year on historical things like the history of Apothecary Hall, the pharmacy museum.
The history of what?
Apothecary Hall, the pharmacy museum on Water Street.
Mm-hmm.
So we've done different stories like that, and I find it very, very interesting in trying to research it and put it in a nice form in our book with an interview and some pictures and trying to make it.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit more later on.
Sure,
Because I
sure.
think that'd be very interesting for our listeners.
Okay.
Were there any parts when you were working on it? Were there any parts of it which surprised you, which you really found very surprising.
There was actually there was two of the stories that I worked on. One of them was I started to do a story about the Victoria Cross, awarded to civilians and soldiers in time, especially in the First and Second World War, and everyone knew that everyone's heard of Tommy Ricketts, the famous Newfoundlander who was a pharmacist. He was awarded the Victoria Cross, and then when he came back to return from the war,
What did he do to earn that?
he single-handedly, I think, took out a couple of the German machine gun hills.
He was an artillery.
He was a soldier, yes. So
Soldier?
in the First World War, so in 1919, he was in France and Belgium, and that's where he was awarded the Victoria Cross for his bravery. But there was also, I was surprised to learn that there was a second Newfoundlander, John Bernard Croak. He was from Notre Dame Bay, and he was also
Could you repeat his name?
Sure. John Bernard Croak.
Croake?
Yes. No E.
No E.
Yeah.
Croak.
Yes. So his family was from Notre Dame Bay, and again he joined the war effort, First World War, and he died in September 2018 in France, and he was awarded it after his death. He was awarded the Victoria Cross. So I had no idea there was a second
There were
Newfoundlander.
two.
Yes, and they're the only two that were ever awarded the Victoria Cross in all times.
Do we know what areas they fought in mostly in World War One? What parts?
it
Was it
was-
mostly in France?
It was mostly in France. I think they did start in Belgium. In some cases, they did fight in Belgium, but it was in France that they
And they
that
were
both
both just
died.
ordinary soldiers. They weren't
That's right,
specifically
they were-
officers or.
No, that's right. They had their ties to Kings Cove in their ancestors were from Kings Cove here out near Bonavista Vista Bay, and
that was one of them.
yeah
near
they're-
Kings
they're-
Cove,
yeah,
and
they're
the other
both,
man-
both had family ties from there.
Oh, I thought you said Notre Dame Bay was.
Yes, he was born in Notre Dame Bay, but
Which
they both.
is where? Do you know? I mean, do you know where in Notre Dame Bay he was
It's called
born?
Little Bay, Notre Dame Bay.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and they were just one of them. I think John Bernard was, I believe, he was a farmer, and Tommy Ricketts. I think he was just a young man. He actually, I don't know if you know the story about him. He was so young at the time, and he lied about his age in order to
I vaguely
enlist.
remember this. He was about 16.
Yes, and
wasn't
I think he said he was 18, so he was
Yes.
able to enlist. So he was
Yeah.
just a young teenager. They're both young teenagers. They joined the war effort, and both of them were, awarded the
And
Victoria
can you
Cross.
tell us a tiny bit about the bravery they showed? What was it that they showed? Like
Yes, well, what it was. They
just
were
as ordinary soldiers, they
ordinary
did what?
soldiers. Yes, they were in the trenches, and I guess the enemy were firing on them, and they kind of just went up by themselves and kind of just advanced and shot their way in, and then got into the German holes and took out some of the machine guns that were there, and then I guess saved the rest of their regiments.
Heavens.
Yes.
Just by foot they
Just
went
by foot,
in.
yes, by foot,
And
yes.
they were so exposed in those.
So
once you come
exposed.
out of those trenches, they were so exposed.
Yes.
It's amazing they were able to survive.
Yes, and this is why they were rewarded for their valor.
Were they killed during that time when they
Well,
went out to do that?
Well, John Bernard Croak, he was mortally wounded because of that effort that he made. But Tommy Ricketts did survive the
He
war.
did survive.
Yes, and he came back and he opened a pharmacy in the St. John's Water Street West.
Oh.
Yes, he was there for many years. Edwards
Oh.
Drugs. Yes.
I had
where they
forgotten a bit about that too. What parts? Well, how is your almanac organized? What parts are in your 2019 almanac,
Yes. Well, we have the
or sections? I
yeah,
should
we
say.
have the sections. We do have the different sections in the almanac. We have all our Newfoundland and Labrador climate, which would be for 2019 which would include things like the sunset, sunrise, phases of the moon, iceberg predictions, hurricanes, the tides, and the very popular sunset, sunrise. And I also have two other sections, our history and tradition, where we talk about the different stories. I have articles and stories on. A nice one you might enjoy, Barbara, is the interviewed Jerome Canning out at the Wooden Boat Museum in Winterton. He's a master boat builder, and we talked about how he is building traditional type boats using a little bit of modern technology to
I
do
think
it.
I have interviewed him.
Yeah, oh, wow, that's it's a fabulous location.
Somebody
that they're
from there. I
making.
don't remember exactly the person, but it was
Yes.
certainly from the museum, yes.
Yes. So we have, articles like that. We mentioned about the Apothecary Hall Pharmacy Museum. And included in that, I have some stories there about Bob Bartlett and his explorations and his tie to Newfoundland. And we have of course, their old-time songs and poetry from the Gerald Doyle collection, which is quite popular. And then and we have a natural province section. We talk about the plight of the Newfoundland pony and also
Oh, yes.
the right whale and how they could be extinct in 20 years if something's not done to protect them. And we have a nice story there about the Labrador nor'easter of 1885 and the effect that that had on the
So
Labrador.
basically the sections are divided into climate, history, traditional stories,
Hmm.
and also stories about natural phenomena or nature.
Yes, nature in the
Uh-huh.
province. And the reason why we actually did that this year,
Is that new?
it is new. Yes, we
Uh-huh.
had Joan Sullivan had done a review of our almanac in the Telegram in May, and she had made some suggestions actually in her review that
In this year
yes,
for 2019?
well, she should review the 2018
Oh, she was
almanac.
reviewing the
Reviewing-
2018 one.
Yes,
Yeah.
and she had actually made some suggestions about that. So I decided to that would make it flow a little bit nicer, have our different sections, and it was a great idea that she had, and we enacted it. So
Well, when you look at your own almanacs you've compiled, and also looking at some of the others you've looked at or studied in the last few years, how would you describe an almanac for people who don't really know that word? What do people think of as an almanac?
Well, I guess it'd be weather forecasting. A lot of the almanacs that sometimes you may see at the grocery store, there might be the Farmer's Almanac. That would be there.
The Sailor's Almanac, maybe?
Possibly.
Yeah,
I've seen the Farmers for sure, and the Canadian Almanac. I guess they're a little bit different than ours. Ours are all as local, so it's
Provincial.
provincial. As Newfoundland and Labrador,
Yeah.
for example, if we had the sunrise sunset tables, it's actually times. It's the actual times of the sunsets in Newfoundland and Labrador. A lot of the almanacs that you might see. They usually come out of the States and they'll say, if you're in this time zone, add on an hour and a half or subtract 3 hours. So sometimes it's hard to get the local aspect to it. And ours have, of course, all the Newfoundland stories, the local stories
Yes.
in our almanacs.
Well, that makes it very interesting.
Yes.
It's not just facts and figures and so on.
No.
Well, I think, I'm sure this has gone on for hundreds and thousands of years, that people have made compiled some sort of something in some form for their area.
Yes.
And you've probably seen quite a few different kinds of almanacs, have you?
Yes.
From
yes.
different types and different countries too?
Different countries. A lot of them from the States. Again, they would. Focus on the weather. Maybe they might have a few tips in there, but
do they seem to be more North American almanacs, or do you hear about them from other countries as well?
most of the ones I've seen have been from within North America. And you're right. Maybe certainly with farmers, and maybe so. Maybe some type of sailors had some type of almanac years ago to help them with their forecasting and their charts for sailing.
The ones that you've seen, are they organized at all similarly to yours, to the one you have? I mean, other than the additions you made for traditions and culture and nature, are they generally organized somewhat the same?
They would, in that they would have perhaps tables for sunset, sunrise, and the tides, that type of thing. But again, a person would have to add or subtract, times, get into the right time zone. So that's what they seem to focus on. Maybe some gardening tips. Yes.
Have you become aware of which kinds of people are the most keen to get a new copy for the next year? Of yours?
Yeah, but it's kind of all ages, I remember last year we had a lady that contacted us, and she said that her grandson in Alberta, he used to call her every day and said, Nan, what's the weather going to be like in St. John's tomorrow? So she sent him a copy. And a lot of people really enjoy our Newfoundland section, and especially the Gerald Doyle songs and the folklore and the poems.
But
So
it's
that
not.
that
So
seems
it's
to
not
be
necessarily one kind of occupation.
no. It's
That
this wide range and especially some of the older generation really enjoy it, and that's what we find. A lot of people are buying the as a
as
Christmas gift,
gifts.
yeah, for
Uh huh.
the parents and grandparents.
Oh, are they?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
And what would you say is the most popular section for most people? I guess it varies.
Yeah, it varies. Some people are quite keen on having the tides and the sunrise sunset. Some people really
Mm-hmm.
enjoy that
Mm-hmm.
section. We've expanded that section, especially for the people who are very
Mm-hmm.
into the
Mm-hmm.
tides and the sunsets. I think that overall our history and tradition section, especially the divines, we have some divines, superstitions and sayings, phrases, Newfoundland weather lore, our old time songs and poetry of Newfoundland seem to be very, very popular.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And it's a paperback copy, isn't it?
It is, yes.
And approximately how many pages does it
We have
have?
128 pages.
So it's not
Uh,
very heavy and it's not very fat.
no, it's a good size for a
Yes.
stocking stuffer, as
Yes.
we say to people.
Yes. It's
And
about, how would you describe the dimensions?
I
About
think it's about
8 by
yeah, it's about
10?
6.5 by 8.5.
6.5. So it's a
And
handy size.
it's a soft cover with it, and
Yeah.
it has hundreds of beautiful color photographs from
Photographs and
all
also
over the
some graphs and,
yes, all
and
over the island, and yes,
factual
graphs.
information,
That's right, and
well organized.
calendars, and just show how much rain, how much snow is
Yes.
forecast, and yeah, and there's
And
even a recipe section now. We have some
okay.
different recipes, Newfoundland style recipes.
Where can people find or obtain these?
Well, we have our website.
Yes, I
up in
wanted to ask you about contacts for
Yes,
anybody who wants to contact you.
sure. So it's our website is Doyle's Almanac NL.ca. That's Doyle's Almanac NL.ca. Our phone number is 709 726 0197.
Now, would you repeat all of that and spell out the title
Sure.
of the Doyle and so on?
Yeah, so it's Doyle's Almanac NL.ca. It's DOYLES ALMANAC NL.ca. And our phone number, 709 726 0197. In addition to that, we also have a lot of locations. We have probably 60 locations throughout the province.
Throughout the province?
Yes.
What generally are those locations?
Yeah, for example, downtown we have, Fred's, the Rocket Bakery, O'Brien's, the Newfoundland Weavery, Mrs. Fagan in Churchill Square selling the vegetables, Taylor's Fish Market and
Really?
CVS.
The lady in the...
Yes,
in
Ms. Fagan, yes, yes.
uh-huh.
Big Goods, all the Coleman's locations throughout the province. An interesting one is the Greats Cove Studios. I'm not sure if you've been up in the top of the Avalon. They have a lovely little studio and a restaurant there. They sell it.
And in the rest of the province, where
Yeah,
generally you
well,
said
all pharmacies,
pharmacies often have them.
yeah, province-wide. We have Conley distributed by Adler Drew from Newquest Pharmacy Company. He distributes to our pharmacies for us. We have Island Treasures in Corner Brook. So there's about you can see about 50 something locations.
Would you repeat the telephone number and the website again?
Sure.
Or is there also an email address?
Email, yeah. The email address would be info@doylesalmanacnl.ca.
Again?
It's info@doylesalmanacnl.ca. And our phone number again is 709 726 0197.
One more time, the telephone.
Sure, 709 726 0197.
And how much is it, Robert?
It's $14.95. The price has been pretty consistent.
Canadian.
Yes, Canadian, yes.
Well, it's very interesting. In our last couple of minutes, is there one particular story that you'd like to tell, just very briefly, or song or information that you think?
Sure. The Monday Palm Regatta, I found that was quite an interesting story when I researched that. It had actually been started in 1930 by the parish priest at St. Teresa's, Father Summers, as as a fundraiser, like a garden party.
Really?
And it developed into a regatta. And I think at one time it was even had, when the pond was bigger,
Uh-huh.
it even had more boats rowing in it than the Royal Regatta we have now.
Oh, and
So
it started when?
it started in 1930, and then
Mm-hmm.
just after the Second World War, it disbanded. But it's actually being renewed with
Yes.
great enthusiasm in
I
2017.
noticed that too. And the Royal Regatta has been going on, what, 200
200
years?
years.
Yes. So,
Yeah.
well, that's interesting.
Yeah, and I should say too about the pharmacy museum at Apothecary Hall is very interesting. It's actually, I'm not sure if people realize it, but it's one of the top 4 pharmacy museums in the
I
world.
think a lot of people don't know about that
Yes.
museum, and it's on the west end of Water Street.
Water Street, yes, and it was previously a pharmacy, actually, a running pharmacy from 1922 to 1986.
Was it?
And then the Pharmacy Association took it over, turned it into a museum, and the museum is just celebrating its 30th year this year.
And it's open often?
It's open all during the summer, and then in the winter months by appointment
By appointment.
through the Newfoundland Pharmacy Board.
Okay.
But it's a beautiful museum. They have a lot of antique oak cabinets there, and
And jars and things.
jars,
Yes,
hundreds of
yes.
artifacts. So we have a really nice story in the Almanac about the museum.
Okay, well, we'll have to find out a little bit more about that. Well, our very welcome guest has been Robert Doyle, telling us about the almanac that he has compiled for 2019 called Doyle's
2019 Almanac of Newfoundland and Labrador.
Right. Thank you so much for coming, Robert.
Well,
it's
thanks,
really
Barbara.
always so interesting to hear what you have to say about it. And I
Very
really
enjoyable.
look forward to having a good look at one.
Sure, very enjoyable talking to you. Thank you again.
You're welcome. My very sincere thanks to Evan Hodder, who is an extremely important part of our guest interview production. Thank you, Evan. And I hope you listening will join us again next week for guest interview on VOWR at AM 800. We appreciate your sharing your time and interest with us. And guest interview is broadcast Sundays at 2 p.m., rebroadcast Wednesdays at 7:30 p.m., on radio at AM 800, online at VOWR.org, and on cable radio at Rogers 945 and Bell Alliant at 756. I think I have those mixed up. It's Rogers 945 and Bell Alliant at 756. Sorry about that. This has been VOWR's guest interview, and I thank you very much again for being with us today. I'm Barbara DeLand.